Hello, my name is Sethu Nguna, and I'm an instructional designer within the university's Teaching and Learning Office at UKZN. Today, I will be presenting a presentation on humanizing online learning experiences, enhancing collective meaning-making through instructional design. My presentation today will be made up of 5 sections, 4 in the main. I'll be going through the introduction and background, the objectives and questions, theoretical frameworks, the findings, and finally wrapping it all up. In terms of the introduction, with the digitalization trend within higher education, there's been a convergence of instructional and learning design orientations across higher education institutions, with the transition to online learning centered on considerations of instrumental dimensions. By that I mean issues of technical, such as the learning management systems integration into teaching and learning practice, the features, how students access it, etc., as well as the procedural issues related to how students are able to access these tools, be it their digital literacies, the processes they use, the resources available to them, as well as issues related to timetabling and the such. Now, of course, with this new orientation, there is an assumed objectivity and value neutrality of the tools that are being used, but also of the activities that are happening online. The normalized practice of instructional and learning design, therefore, has in the main been limited in terms of its theoretical perspectives. That's more so in terms of the critical. That is what I will be delving into. Now, in terms of my research objectives, within this presentation, I'm just going to identify compatibilities between the humanizing pedagogy and online theory. And I'm also going to explore prospects for embedding the humanizing pedagogical approach into the design of holistic online learning experiences. The question would be why? Well, we first want to understand what are the concept compatibilities between the humanizing pedagogy approach and online learning theory. And secondly, what are the possible integration points for the humanizing pedagogical approach within online instructional and learning design? Now, we first begin with a theoretical framework. We first need to understand the learning theory that frames our activities in online learning, how students navigate the knowledge, how they collect it, and how they perceive it during their learning. And in terms of the pedagogy, of course, the approaches of teaching framed through the various learning theories, lecturer and academic staff styles, choices that relate to assessment, as well as feedback. And then move it forward another step into instructional design, the actual design, development, and delivery of learning experiences that are framed through the pedagogical approach. So you can see it's almost like a train of thought. It begins with the learning theory, it moves into the pedagogy, which is framed by the learning theory, and then the instructional design, which is framed by the pedagogy. We'll begin with learning theory. Framing this particular presentation, in order to shape the environment, we have Anderson's online learning model. And as that figure states, he viewed the various attributes of learning. So he's looking at both the student, the knowledge, the assessment, and community of learning within online learning. And he looks at it in terms of how it affords certain things. What are the learning systems able to what are they able to provide within the learning process? And of course, through this, he took on Siemens' focus on both the cognitive as well as the social presence in learning experiences by looking at the connectivity. As you can see through the figure, he identifies the learner-learner connections, the learner-teacher connections, the learner-content connection, as well as the teacher-teacher connections. But he also views it even in terms of the teacher-teacher connections in the broader learning community of practice. And within this model, he enhances the function of interaction and engagement within education as it takes place online. Then we'll move into pedagogy, once again, framing or shaping the environment. And we look at Freire's Humanizing Pedagogy. I'll use a quote of his where he says, "Knowledge emerges through the continuing hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, with the world, and with each other. Zong, in 2018, beautifully illustrates the humanizing pedagogy in terms of this figure, in which he says critical consciousness leads to humanization, and critical consciousness generates not only dialogue generates critical consciousness, which then leads, more critical consciousness leads to dialogues. It's almost like a didactic relationship between the two. And through dialogue, it contributes to the problem-posing nature of education. And in that problem-posing, we then again generate a humanizing experience. So in essence, to frame it all together, there is no learning or humanization without the act of mutual dialogue. There's a lot of work done on the humanizing pedagogy within South Africa by authors such as Kiert, 2011 and 2017, as well as Zinn in 2016. And in it, they prioritize the understanding of the need to understand certain prejudices and attitudes which find themselves within the learning space. And in trying to address this, there's a need to be attentive to both inclusion and exclusion, and enhance the participatory and dialogical approach to education as it exists. So within this, we also speak to issues of diversity, of learning needs, as well as styles. And once again, within this, we look at human motivation, both their orientation and ability, the environment and tools that are being taken place, and we also break it down in the instructional design perspective in terms of tasks and experiences. Tasks being platforms and features, experiences being how people engage with one another, the activities they engage in, as well as their general interaction within the learning environment. So in terms of the role of instructional design, the figure shows there's quite a bit at it. But as Rao in sort of centers, we need to look at inclusive instructional design, which means understanding students and their cultural orientation, centering the social and cognitive presence, designing authentically for student differences, adapting content to student needs, and integrating support as well as technology. So when we bring it all together, we've discussed the learning theory, we've discussed the pedagogy, and we've discussed the instructional design, looking at Anderson, looking at Frere's Humanizing Pedagogy, as well as universal learning design. And each of them identifying the need for interaction, dialogue, and an assessment or cognizance of diversity within the learning space, leading into a humanizing online experience. Finally, there is need in terms of the practical approach to enhancing the humanizing aspect of online learning experiences. We break it down once again to the engagement, the activities, and assessment. And within them, we identify that there must be structure and consistency, not overly formal, creation of an open and inviting space, and being socially and culturally cognizant, reality-based activities, facilitating a consistent and ongoing calls for collaboration and action with a diverse activity base. In terms of assessment, there needs to be problem-based with different approaches, could be individual, partnerships, teams, but also diversity in action, whether it's empirical, creative, audiovisual, or written. To close it off, the ability for instructional designers to design humanizing online learning experiences exists. And what is required is a critical reflection on not only Anderson's learning theory, Frere's Humanizing Pedagogy, but also a deep interaction with the universal learning design framework in order to ensure that students not only gain from the cognitive experience of learning online, but also engage greatly and also sort of benefit from the social presence of everyone within the learning space. Thank you.